What's going on, guys? Waco from Grail Watch, and I'm here with my buddy Nicholas Rudaz. How are you, sir?
I'm very well, thank you. Great to see you again. Welcome at Watchland.
It is my pleasure. So for those of you who don't know Nicholas, he is a leader here at Watchland and one of the greatest guys that I know, and also an extraordinary chef. And we had together one of the most amazing fondues I've ever had in my life, thanks to Nicholas.
Well, thank you very much. It was a great pleasure to have you in my house yesterday for this wonderful fondue. And we were talking about the spoon, and I told you how important it is to stir the fondue always in the same shape, and that's doing the 8 shape.
Yes. This is the interesting thing was like I tried to make fondue in my house before, and something was always a little bit missing. And it was only when I was watching Nicholas, and he said, you know, actually you have to use a very special spoon, a spoon with a hole.
Correct. It's all in the spoon. A lot of it is in the spoon. So for your next fondue in Singapore, I would like to offer you this holy grail of spoons for your fondue.
That's amazing, and I love that it's got a heart in the center of it as well. Nicholas, thank you, sir.
My pleasure.
That's great.
My pleasure.
So, guys, now we're going to transition from talking about cheese, which is clearly one of my favorite subjects, you know, to
second.
my second favorite subject, to my absolute favorite subject, which is watches, and what a watch we have to discuss today. When I think of iconic watches, you know, Franck Muller has created so many of these, right? And there's a period in the 1990s where you see such design richness combined with amazing complications. You know, tell me about this period for you, Nicholas.
Well, it was a unique period for Franck Muller, and Franck was producing complications and designs that were not seen at all on the market. So it was an incredible time, and Franck was very creative, very bold, and pushing the boundaries of watchmaking to the limit, and it was fantastic.
Amazing. And you know, I remember looking at these chronographs from the 1990s. So we're going to discuss two types of chronographs. One is a manual wind chronograph with a Lemania movement that is kind of a tribute to the classic chronographs of the 1940s, right?
Correct.
And then the second one is also a pretty amazing watch as well. It's a double-sided chronograph, which means that the pinion of the chronograph hand travels all the way from the dial to the back of the watch, where you find a second dial, and you see that there's all these amazing scales on there as well. Correct. Which is such a genius idea.
Measurement tools.
Absolutely. But let's talk about that first watch. So I don't know if you guys have been following sort of the vintage watch collecting world. You'll see that like the Franck Muller chronographs from the 1990s suddenly emerged. I think it was on, a Collected Man, a Silas's site that I first saw, Silas Walton's site that I first saw it. And I was looking at this watch and I'm like, wow. It's absolutely stunning, you know. And bear in mind, the context of the '90s, no one was making really chronographs, right? Correct. You know, and he had Franck had seemed to be inspired by the classic chronographs of the '40s with these beautiful sort of like dials that had applied brigade numerals to them. The case was beautiful as well, rounded with these oversized kind of dome pushers. And so I approached you, Nicholas, and I said, look, here's a picture of this watch. I tried to buy the vintage watch, but someone bought it before me. I only recently discovered that was my friend Mark Cho. I love them. I saw 2 executions, a 3-counter watch with a black dial and a 2-counter watch with a silver dial. And I approached you, Nicholas, and I said, Nicholas, would it be possible, sir, if we could kind of revive these watches and make them as a collaboration between us?
Absolutely. All right. And it was a pleasure to go and discover our stock, and we were fortunate enough to have the right movements and beautiful old dials as well. And I'm wearing one of the inspirations on my hand right now.
Amazing, yes. So that's a double-sided chronograph. So,
Correct.
Okay, the moment that I almost fell out of my seat was when, so we were discussing this watch in particular, and Nicholas was like, you know, like we could put a modern movement in it, we could put an automatic movement in it, but it would change the dimensions of the watch quite significantly and make it quite thick. And this watch is actually relatively slim because it's got a manual wind movement in there.
Very slim, very elegant.
Yes. And he said, let me try to see what I can find. And when he brought out these trays of new old stock vintage Lemania 1874 movements from the 1990s, I almost like started crying. I couldn't believe it. It was just such an extraordinary moment.
Very emotional moment.
And then the idea that, you know, Nicholas, that you would, you know, allow me to use these movements, which I think are kind of a treasure trove for you, in this incredible limited series of, you know, of watches. I mean, I have to say thank you for this, you know?
Well, our pleasure. Our pleasure.
And then so we sat down together with your colleague Jean-Luc, who's the head of design here, and we kind of went through the whole process of it. Now, so we didn't want to make just a facsimile of the watches that came from the past. We wanted to be deeply inspired by it, make a tribute to them, but also kind of update it for the modern customer as well.
Correct.
So the first thing we decided on was I think the perfect size would be between 38.5 to 39 mm, right?
39 in this case. Yeah.
And so we decided 39 mm would be just right. Then on top of that, we looked at the dial and the language of the dial, and we were like, you know what, we love this whole idea of the applied brigade numerals, but let's punch them up a little bit. Let's make them a little sexier. Let's increase the size of them a little bit, as well as the dot markers, to create something even bolder and even more in keeping with Franck Muller's kind of very Latin spirit, right?
Thanks to your great taste as well.
Wow, come on. So the result is this incredible watch. I have to say, I'm absolutely blown away by it. It's just a work of extraordinary beauty. I mean, I have to say thank you. It's.
No, thank you.
Yes.
We're delighted to be participating with Grail Watch.
Oh, thank you so much. Now, Nicholas, not every manufacturer would actually go into its archives and create basically an all-new model, which is a tribute to something that you had in the 90s. I think that's an incredible expression of Franck Muller's manufacturing capacity as well.
Well, absolutely. We're a family-owned business. We are family-operated, and we have a long history of incredible world premieres, and it's fun to always look back on some of those amazing models.
Yeah, and I also want to say that because we went to go look at the workshop when they were going through the movements, and so every one of these movements, even though it's a vintage new old stock movement from the 90s, was painstakingly torn down, clean, refinished, reassembled, tested to the maximum. So the amount of effort, it probably would have been easier to just use a new movement, But I really want to say thank you for that incredible gesture. I mean, it was awesome of you.
Our pleasure. Fantastic.
And on the wrist, it is just stunning. It is, to me, the ultimate gentleman's chronograph. It's in steel.
Elegant.
Yeah, and we decided to brush the case as well to give it a little bit more of a sporty elan, right? And then just a subtle stepping on the bezel with a little bit of a polished perimeter just at the top where it meets the sapphire crystal. And then the dial itself. What a masterwork of beauty, I have to say.
And it's got the open back as well.
So this is really interesting as well. So the original watches were solid case back watches, right? But we're like, but the movement is so beautiful, we have to make them open case back. But then we were like, the original idea that Franck had was that he wanted these watches to be amagnetic. He wanted them to be tool watches. Mm-hmm. So you can actually choose which case back you would like, because we've actually supplied a second case back, which is a solid case back, right?
Correct.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Amazing. Thank you, Nicholas. This is so cool. So guys, stay tuned. We'll be launching this soon, and I hope for those of you who get one, you love it as much as I do. It is an incredible part of watchmaking history, a huge tribute to what Franck Muller was doing in the 90s, but continues to do today. And I absolutely love it, and I'm super honored, sir. Thank you.
Our great pleasure. Thank you, Wei.
Cheers, guys.
Thank you, Grail.